In a small college town, a tavern frequented by students ran the following ad in the campus paper during the days before Parents' Weekend. Bring your parents for lunch Saturday. We'll pretend we don't know you. The ad was soon challenged by the college chaplain, who posted a revised version on the campus bulletin board. It read, "Bring your parents to chapel Sunday. We'll pretend we know you." I have a real-life memory of something of that nature occurring. When my dad preached in Talbot, Oklahoma, it of course was a college town, Northeastern State was there, and one Sunday, a young person came up and introduced his parents to my dad, just like he knew my dad, and my dad says, "I have no clue who that was." But he wanted his parents to think he'd been coming to church. Well, that's pretending to be something that you're not. John Ortberg facetiously said, "I know I'm supposed to be humble, but what if no one notices?" We're living the Christian life. We're doing the things of the Christian life. But sometimes we wonder, well, what if no one notices? In Matthew chapter 5, that we've been studying for a number of weeks since we had that break in the middle, Jesus gave and then illustrated basic principles to guide his disciples. In chapters 6 and 7, the emphasis is on matters to everyday Christian living. D. Martin Lloyd-Jones wrote that these chapters present a picture of the children in relationship to their father as they wend their way on this pilgrimage called life. Larry Chenord wrote, "True piety stems from a heart singularly devoted to God as Father, and thus all pious acts should be positive expression of that relationship. Such religious devotion stands in stark contrast to the hypocrite who tailors every act of piety to maximize public recognition." Once again, Jesus' discussion assumes a new ideal state of affairs where his disciples practice a selfless righteousness and live only for God's reward. In chapter 5 of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus points out that wrong thinking is as bad as wrong action. Here in the first part of chapter 6, Jesus says wrong thinking can even make a right action wrong. There's a possible connection to chapter 5, verse 48. "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." Perhaps Jesus was implying, to whatever extent you attain that perfection, do not parade it before men so they will see it and applaud you. In chapter 5, verse 20, Jesus had said, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." Jesus had some strong words to say about the religious of his day, the religious leaders of his day. All too often, they had changed the meaning of God's law, the law of Moses, had added their traditions, and were very much missing the point of what it was all about. In Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 18, Jesus' challenge is for his followers to surpass the righteousness of the hypocrites in regard to having right motives for right actions. In chapter 6, verse 2, "So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues." Who are these hypocrites? Well, we learn from Matthew chapter 23 that they are the scribes and the Pharisees, indeed, the religious leaders of the day. We notice here in the first part of chapter 6 that Jesus says, "Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." Jesus states the wrong reason for doing good things. It is a general warning. He speaks of acts of righteousness, doing what is right. Righteousness is doing what is right. Another word would be piety. It refers to religious practice. Here is what you believe, and here is how you put it into practice. 3 examples are given. We will look at the first this evening. But Jesus says, don't do your deeds of righteousness to be noticed by others. Well, you might raise the question, what about chapter 5, about verse 16? "In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." Well, there's a difference in doing a thing that is seen by others and in doing a thing in order to be seen by others. The basic difference between chapter 5, verse 16 and chapter 6, verse 1 is a matter of motivation. In 5:16, the aim is to glorify God. In chapter 6, verse 1, the aim is to glorify oneself. Now, Jesus says that to do righteous deeds for the wrong motivation is unacceptable religion. Let's notice the first part that we're going to study this evening. "Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you." We have these 3 examples. Jesus speaks of hypocrites. The word hypocrite in ancient times was a pretty neutral word, because it basically referred to an actor on a stage. And you have seen the pictures of the mask. In ancient times, especially in the Greek culture, the actors would have a mask that they would put in front of their face. But they were playing a role. They were playing someone different than what they actually were. Sometimes today, when we see an actor who plays the same role for many, many episodes, the person we think, the character, we identify the character with the person. The person might be an entirely different kind of person. But the hypocrite, he was an actor on the stage. Well, Jesus uses this term hypocrite to refer to one who used a mask of spirituality to hide his true nature. These spiritual play actors appeared to do good deeds, but were actually giving a performance. They had a flair for the dramatic. It speaks of trumpet sounding. Well, there may be a connection with one of the festivals where the ram's horns were blown, and at the same time period there were gifts given. But it's more than likely kind of the thing, well, they do it in such a way that it's as if they were blowing their trumpets, tooting their own horn, so to speak. The hypocrite stage was the world, and their audience was the crowd. Their goal was that which is sought by every performer: hearty applause from their audience. And they apparently received it. But Jesus says this is all they would receive. There is the visible audience of mankind, and the invisible audience of God, your Father, Jesus says. And the audience that matters when we do acts of righteousness, the audience that matters is God. The New English Bible renders verse 1 like this: "Be careful not to make a show of your religion before men. If you do, no reward awaits you in your Father's house in heaven." Jesus gives a warning, and then he gives an example, verses 2 through 4. After issuing the general warning, Jesus gave the three examples as we've mentioned. We'll look at the first of these. But D.A. Carson called these the three acts of Jewish piety. And it has been suggested that the three relate to the basic ways our religion expresses itself toward others. First toward others, benevolent help; toward God, prayer; and toward self, self-denial. Each example follows the same pattern. Jesus says what not to do, and then what to do. In each case, Jesus noted what rewards will be received for the actions described. He first tells his listeners how not to help the poor. "So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets." And he gives, as the hypocrites do, in the synagogues and on the streets. William Barclay stated that to the Jew, almsgiving was the most sacred of all religious duties. And as we said, the trumpets were probably figurative. But the giver does make his giving known. The poor still benefit from the help, but the giver doesn't. Phillips Translations puts it this way: "Believe me, they have all the reward they are going to get." Then Jesus tells his hearers how to help the poor, verses 3 and 4. When you help others, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Well, let's face the fact that even in Scripture, not all giving is secret. We remember that Jesus was watching people give, putting their money into the box, and he observed that poor widow who gave a very small amount, but he made an object lesson. He said, "This woman has given all she has." And we're also well acquainted with Barnabas. He had a lot of good qualities, and one of his good qualities was that he was a generous giver. And Luke tells us about that. And the Apostle Paul compliments the Macedonians, the Christians in Macedonia, that they gave generously. In fact, they gave beyond their means. The concern is not about letting others know of a gift, but about giving with a desire to receive praise. It is Barnabas and his contributions versus Ananias and Sapphira. Apparently their motivation in giving was to receive the recognition for giving, but they didn't want to give everything, and so lost their lives. Jack Lewis observed there's a significant difference in being seen doing good works and in doing good works to be seen. Don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. Don't dwell in your mind on the good you have done. A children's nursery rhyme tells about a boy who pulled a plum out of a pie and said, "What a good boy am I." I'm not sure how that all works, but anyway, that's what he said. In our thoughts, we are not to say, "What good boys and girls are we," when we do something good. John R.W. Stott observed, Christian giving is to be marked by self-sacrifice and self-forgetfulness. A.B. Bruce says we should show when we're tempted to hide and hide when we're tempted to show. What does he mean? Back at the first part of the sermon, Jesus says, "Let your light shine before men." Says, don't hide your light. Don't put it under a bowl. Christians are sometimes tempted to do that. Our light should be shining brightly, but we don't let it shine brightly. And so, we should show when we're tempted to hide. But we must also avoid being a show-off, doing our good deeds just to be seen by others. In my youth, my dad and mother encountered a preacher at another congregation. I think my dad went to help hold a meeting at this place. And the preacher's last name was Poole, P-O-O-L. And he said it wouldn't do for me to give money to a college because they'd just end up calling it the Pool Hall. Have a different meaning, wouldn't it? Some people give a lot of money because they want to have a building or something named after them. The money does good. They receive recognition for it. But we might wonder, would they give if they wouldn't receive the recognition? Serena Williams won the Wimbledon tennis tournament for the first time in 2002. After her impressive victory, a reporter asked Serena if it bothered her that many of the English fans were rooting against her. She politely said no, she understood. There had been people rooting against her all her life, but she still wanted to win for herself. Then she added, besides, my dad was sitting in those stands, and I knew he was rooting for me, and I wanted to please him. Jesus is saying to his listeners and to us, when you do good works, when you give, you don't do it for the praise of those around you. You do it for the praise of your Father in heaven. Eugene Patterson, in The Message, paraphrases our text this way: be especially careful when you're trying to be good so that you don't make a performance out of it. It might be good theater, but the God who made you won't be applauding. When you do something for someone else, don't call attention to yourself. You've seen them in action, I'm sure. Play actors, I call them. Treating prayer meeting and street corner alike as a stage. Acting compassionate as long as someone is watching. Playing to the crowds. They get applause, true, but that's all they get. When you help someone out, don't think about how it looks. Just do it quietly and unobtrusively.